Today I want to take a little time to talk about a subject that can sometimes be kind of an emotional subject and sometimes controversial. I want to talk about allowing children access to firearms in the home. Now, if you've watched my channel since the early days, you know when my children were younger, like when they were like 11 and 5, I went to great lengths to make sure that neither of them had access to my firearms. I had safes mounted in walls, I had safes on tabletops, I had safes in my bedroom, I had them mounted on my dresser. Whenever a gun wasn't on my hip, it was locked up. Every gun in the house was under lock and key at all times. Now, a lot of people were like, well, what if something happens and you're not there and they need a gun to protect themselves? And I'm like, well, at 11 and 5, I think I'll take that obligation. I think I'll burden the obligation of protecting them from harm. I'm not going to leave them home alone and leave it to them. At those ages, it's far more likely they'll do something stupid with a gun and hurt themselves or someone else than it is they'll defend themselves with a firearm, especially since I don't leave them home alone. They're children. So I didn't hear any of that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to give access to guns to small children. They will be locked up if they're not on my person. And I recommend that to everybody. I strongly say that you, as a parent, should be responsible to deny access to firearms to small children or any child that isn't responsible enough to handle those firearms. Now, I don't think there should be laws as to how you store them or how you lock them up, but I do think there should be laws that give you consequences if your child gets a hold of a gun, harms themselves or someone else. Now, I know often when someone leaves a gun laying around and a kid gets it and they end up killing themselves or a sibling, people are like, oh, they've suffered enough. No, they haven't. Put them in jail, as far as I'm concerned. But that topic aside, that's a whole different topic. Now my kids are getting a little older. So now there's a little bit new wrinkle here to this story for me. They're not a little bit older, they're a lot older. My kids now one of them is 21 and living at home while he goes to school. One of them is 15 and in high school. They're both much older than they used to be, so I'm much looser with access to firearms now. In fact, I decided they need to have access to firearms because where we live at now, there's not only risk of two-legged critters getting out of hand, there's a lot of risk of four-legged critters getting out of hand. We got bears, we've got cougars, and so on up here. So they may need a firearm at some time when I'm not home because now they are home alone quite often because, like I said, they're 15 and 21. Anytime they don't want to go somewhere I'm going, I'm usually like, cool, I get to go by myself. Or, hey, it's just the two of us get to go. The kids are staying home. That's always a nice thing when you get a little bit, when you have your kids be a little older. So they're here alone quite often. But, now, my oldest son, they're both different. My oldest son, he's very even-tempered, very easygoing, and very responsible young person. So if he wanted guns in his room, I'd say, yep, here's some guns in your room. Here's your own personal safe. However you want to do it. You're responsible enough to do this. I would trust him unsupervised with firearms. He's not interested in that, though. He doesn't really care to have them in his room. He's okay with shooting them every now and then. He's just really not that big into guns. He likes swords and stuff better, which he does have in his room. But so he doesn't really have anything in his room. Now, the youngest one, the 15-year-old, I would not trust him with guns in his room. He would love to have all of his rifles and his pistols and everything on display in his room on the wall, but I won't allow it. And the reason I won't allow it is because he's 15 and he spends a lot of his time in his room unsupervised and he has friends in there quite often while they're unsupervised. I'm not going to be leaving loaded weapons around two teenagers unsupervised because teenagers tend to do stupid shit. I was a teenager once and I look back at things I was doing at 15, 16, 17 years old and like, wow, did I not know how dangerous that was? Or did I not know how stupid that was? So I'm not going to put them in that situation. But when he's home alone, he needs access to a firearm. So what I've done is I've put firearms in my room. I went out and bought one of these gun concealment cabinets from Naughty or Wood Shop off Etsy. I found this on Etsy. It was a reasonable price, and I really liked it because it used pegboard instead of that pick and pack foam like a lot of these concealment boxes do. So I went ahead and bought one of these, mounted it over my bed. I put firearms in there that my kids can have access to. Now, when I put this up, a lot of people, I think, missed the point. They were like, oh my God, that's not the best way to have quick access to a gun. If you're in bed, you got to stand up or sit up or blah, blah, blah. Well, for one, it'd still be real easy to get to these, but these aren't for fast access. If I need to leap out of bed with a gun, because people love to use that scenario. If someone's standing over you, well, if someone's already standing over me in my sleep, I've already lost that battle. But let's say I did need a gun quickly at night. I have my carry gun on my nightstand for that. That's what that's there for. This is there if I need more, or if my kids need access to a firearm when I'm not home. Now you might say, well, this is just as bad as putting it in their room because it's unrestricted access if you're not there. Well, not really, because we have motion sensors throughout our house as part of our security system. Well, the one in my bedroom sends an alert to our phones every time someone goes in our bedroom and sends us a little picture. Now, usually it's just Turnip, since he's learned how to open doors and go into bedrooms, but that's a precaution we have to prevent them from just accessing it anytime they want to. Because I have a rule, kids aren't allowed in my bedroom. My bedroom is my bedroom. It's our bedroom. We're allowed in there. The dogs are allowed in there. Kids are not. So the only time they're allowed to go in there is if it's an emergency and they need to get one of those guns. And they know that. And they also know if they go in there and it's not an emergency, I'll see that. So there is some control there. It makes them think, oh, I can't just go in and play with this and get away with it. Because my grandfather had a rifle over the fireplace where we weren't allowed to touch it. But every time I was home alone, I fucking played with it all the time. I even took it apart one time, put it back together, put it back up there while I was alone for a weekend. I think I was like 13, 14 years old. So I know kids do things when they think they can get away with it. So if they go in there and get it, I'll know they went in there and got it. But it's still there. It's still available to them. There's also, like I said, a shotgun and stuff in there. But the guns I have in the cabinet are guns they've both shot. They both know how to use. They're very simple, something they can handle, something they can use very easily. So the access is there, but there's still a little bit of control. Because even though my kids are older, the 21-year-old doesn't need safeguards really, but the 15-year-old still does need a little bit of a safeguard. So if you've got kids in your home, keep that in mind. Make sure, even if you do have access to firearms for them, make sure there's a safeguard where they're held accountable if they do access it. I would never want my kids to be able to access a gun without me knowing they accessed it. So that would be my main thing I would tell people with older kids. If you've got young kids, lock them up. There's no excuse to allow free access, unfettered access, unrestricted access, unsupervised access to children to something that can potentially be used in a bad way like a firearm. There's just no excuse for that. But if they're older and you think they're going to be left at home alone and they do need defense, set up a way that they can have access to a firearm that is, that goes along with their level of responsibility. I would always say never trust a teenager because teenagers do stupid things. Sometimes young adults do stupid things, but you base it on the individual. Like I said, my 21-year-old could have a gun in his room if he wanted. 15-year-old couldn't. But since I put this cabinet up, there's access to my kids to guns. They have access, but I still have a little bit of control. So in my opinion, and in my experience, that is the best way to provide them access while limiting the risks as much as possible.
Oops.
Go ahead. It's a lady at 46 South Road. 46 South Road. Greenfield.
One call, street zone that police.
10-4.
Got the floor to go to that location.
Sorry, what?